My name is Michelle Berry. I am currently a career track professor, assistant professor in gender and women's studies. That's just a fancy, weird term for I teach. So I'm primarily a classroom teacher in gender and women's studies. I also teach history classes for the history department, and I'm the director of undergraduate studies in GWS. I think I'm supposed to talk about my weird career journey. PhD here at the University of Arizona in US history. And when I graduated, the job market for higher education was dismal, to say the least, and jobs only open where my partner and I really didn't want to live. No offense to those places, but we're Mountain West girls, so we did not want to, head to Alabama. And as a result, sort of started looking into secondary education just to see what the opportunities were. And in Tucson, there's a wonderful independent school here in town called, at least when I worked there, it was St. Gregory College Prep School. It's now called the Gregory School. And it just was very strange. It was about a year after I graduated, and a job opened for teaching juniors and seniors in high school. And I applied and got it and spent 10 years there and absolutely loved it. And then transitioned back to the university in 2016. And I'm now teaching all kinds of classes. My background is in environmental history. So I do like history of science and history of technology and all sorts of different kinds of classes. So sort of a strange way to be at the university, circuitous, but education the whole time, my whole life.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ravneet Singh. I am the Chief Data Officer and an Associate Vice President here at the University of Arizona. From a journey perspective, I moved here back in 2004 from India to pursue electrical engineering at the College of Engineering here itself. I graduated in 2009 when the market was not so great for international students as well. So I kind of hear Michelle's pain a little bit, but me being glass half full of kind of a person, I'm like, it's all right, it worked out just fine. University at that point was doing an implementation of our new U-Access systems that you guys see on uaccess.arizona.edu today. I started working there as a temp employee, started understanding what all this data craze was about back then, but started understanding it. And pretty quickly, I realized that this is what my calling was. Kind of believed in the higher ed mission and just having a small role that I can to actually support our students, staff, researchers, faculty members. And I've enjoyed each and every bit of it over the last 12, 13 years that I've been here, but I've been on campus for 18 years. So big thing for me. Then I went back to school full-time while working full-time as well to get my engineering management degree because I think still wanted to stay connected in engineering. That's just how my mind works in terms of processes, efficiencies, and optimization. So I continue to do that. But how Michelle said, I teach, a lot of people would just be like, he's just a data guy. So if that makes any sense, I'm like, I do more than that, but so I'll leave it at that, but happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Morrell. I am a T32 postdoc in cancer prevention and control at the University of Arizona Cancer Center. I got my bachelor's of science from the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign in molecular biology. And at that time, I was fully set on thinking that I wanted to be an optometrist. As life turns out, after I graduated, I went home, I got a job in an eye doctor's office and realized that was not what I wanted to do. And so that was a really great experience for me. And so during that time, though, I found myself gravitating more towards any kind of reading I would, pick up at the bookstore or articles online. I felt like I was always being pulled to nutrition because it was something that I knew I could implement in my life right away. And I liked that. I was like, oh, I want to learn something and implement it right away. And so during that time, I was starting to feel like I wanted to go back to grad school, but I wasn't fully sure. I ended up quitting the job in the eye doctor's office, and I worked at a recreational cooking school in Chicago for a couple of years with some of the coolest chefs ever. And I got to basically go to culinary school for free. It was really fun. And that's when I really figured out I loved to teach, and I loved nutrition, food, cooking, anything like that. So that really solidified my, decision to apply to grad school for nutrition. And so I started here at U of A in 2014, and I defended my PhD last year, November. And so now I've kind of transitioned into a postdoc position at the Cancer Center. And and I'm hoping to stay here. I love Tucson.
I do have a question. So Kristen, Ravneet, Michelle, you've kind of talked generally about your career and your trajectory. Maybe talk about moments where you had to make a shift. And Kristen, you talked about this just recently and how you found your passion and how you knew this was the right path for you. So do you want to maybe just start, just since you're already kind of talking about it, and then we go to Ravneet and Michelle?
Absolutely. So I felt, during my undergrad, I took nutrition courses because I was interested in it, and it supplemented kind of my biology degree, and it kind of fit. There was a lot of overlap in nutritional sciences courses and degree and biology. And so I felt like I was always interested in it. At the time, I thought that being a registered dietitian was really the only thing that you could do with the nutritional sciences degree. I actually was not involved in research as an undergrad. I didn't really understand that undergrads play a really critical role in research. That's not something that's really well known. And I feel like maybe undergrads, just from TAing and speaking to some students, it's a little bit scary to reach out to a lab and seeing if there's an opportunity there for research. But so I relate to that because I didn't know, and no regrets, just lessons, right? So I feel like I had that nutrition, interest, and I kind of just decided with more reading, I just felt like I was reading a lot about research and nutrition research, and I just thought that would be really cool to be on the other side of things. So instead of reading it, actually producing it. And so I think that's what ultimately drew me to, being involved in research and just the ideas, food as thy medicine, and really being on kind of that side of things.
Perfect. Yeah, go ahead, Ravneet.
So I would say initially when I got into this field, it was more about the fact that, one, needed a job. Let's be very honest on that front, because I think once you graduate, that is the number one goal. I'm not going to mince my words around that part for sure. But I think pretty quickly, I realized that the direction that the world was heading in had to have a big involvement from a data perspective. Everyone was trying to figure out what data they can get hands-on to make data-informed decisions. I think higher ed was a place where, and until this day, to be very honest, is far further behind than, let's say, private sector. But I think we have come a long way in higher ed when it comes down to the usage of data to actually make those strategic investments and initiatives that need to be established for our, like I said, workforce and our students to succeed. Pretty quickly, within the first year itself, I realized that as an international student, I had some challenges when I moved here, right? So I wanted to make sure that if somehow I can do something that would help, let's say, our faculty members or our staff or even our students kind of take that burden, or maybe help them have an idea of what our international students need, for example. If we can do that, that would be great. So that just kept me motivated trying to figure out something else. I'm a big firm believer that faculty members are one of the biggest assets that this institution has, or any higher ed institution has. And me starting from the HR side of data, I worked on the faculty data from pretty much the beginning. So that kind of helped me stay connected on how the faculty actually worked on in terms of classes and research and papers and everything else that they were doing. So that kept me motivated from that perspective. And I would say over the years, now we're big in data sciences, we're looking at rankings. How can we improve our university rankings? How can we do better when it comes down to our revenue as a higher ed institution? How can we do better by our faculty when it comes down to pay equity studies? Like all of those things, my role has evolved into a very research-based role. And that is something that initially wasn't part of it. But I think just how I have grown in doing some of these things, I have believed that the motivation keeps changing every year, if not every month from that perspective, or I just find things to motivate myself. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Rav Meat. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Rav Meat, because it is interesting to think about what takes you in the different directions to end up where you are in your dream career. Part of that is to constantly be interested in what you're doing, right? If you have long stretches of boredom, it's probably not your dream career. My route was very circuitous. After undergraduate, so I majored in history and political science as an undergraduate and minored in geology. And I thought about a career in the Park Service. And it was just very hard to get permanent positions in the Park Service at the time. So then I sort of transitioned into the political world and worked for a governor for 4 years. He was term limited. So we all had to go find other jobs. And it was at that moment where, so I've been fortunate because I keep getting these like hard stops in life where it's like, you have to decide what you want to do, right? This job is ending. You have to go do something else. And at that time I just sort of went, what's drawing me? And if you're not presented hard stops in life, then take them, make them, and give yourself an opportunity to just take a deep breath and reflect on where you're at and what lights you up. And I thought, I'm not done learning yet. I really want to know more. And I think someone in the chat asked about, how do you get into higher ed and research? And I thought, I just want to go back to grad school. I'm going to pursue a master's and see if I like it. Well, I loved it, right? So then I just kept going in for the doctorate. And that's when I got exposed to teaching. And it was in the classrooms, just even as a TA, where I just felt completely fulfilled, completely challenged. I had no idea what the heck I was doing. It was utterly intimidating. I think my students were like, oh Lord, what is this person doing? But it was so much fun. And it was fun to grow as a teacher and also to just be engaged in the learning process with my students. So I think at that moment, I was like, oh, I love this. So I get done with my PhD. There's no higher ed positions. I go into the real world and I'm working as a sort of a program director for a local environmental organization. And I was bored. I was just like, this is boring. I don't like this. I miss the classroom. I miss teaching. I miss my students. And so I just sort of started asking around and looking around and found the position at the independent school and got back into the classroom. And then when that job hard stopped, I got to go, what do I want to do now? Do I want to go out and try to be a grant writer and do these other things, which I did for about a year. And then I thought, no, I think I want to try to go back to the university and teach, and was fortunate enough to get hired in gender and women's studies. So I think those hard stops and then assessing, right? Doing sort of a self-assessment of where's my passion, what lights me up, what energizes me every day. And when you have some of the answers to it, takes a little while to figure that out. But once you have figured out, I think you know your general career direction.
Oh, perfect. And, kind of the theme that I kept hearing with each of your answers was, you tried things, right? You just got out there and you tried it, and you leaned into skills that you knew you had and found others and evolved to eventually find a space that, you're highly successful, and maybe you haven't found that dream career yet or at the pinnacle of your career, but definitely on your way and have that process laid out. I'm going to go to the chat here and see if there's other questions. Paige, welcome. It's great to have you. Paige is majoring in fashion studies and minoring in studio art. And her question is really a great one about connections. So maybe we could talk about networking and building your connections so that you can find these types of careers that light you up and fulfill your passions. So Rav Meat, would you want to start?
Absolutely. One thing that I'll say is making connections is easier, but keeping those connections is harder. I think over time, for example, you in your college time, you are in classes with your friends and everything. And once you graduate, somebody moves into a different line. Are you still being able to maintain that connection? Do you still have a connection with your professors and your instructors and everyone once over time? If you did an internship, are you staying in connection with them? I would say making connections comes from just having an open mind, from my perspective, to actually just being able to meet and talk to anyone. Again, we all are diverse from not just how we look, but it's all in here, how we think. And I think from that perspective, a lot of people these days appreciate difference in opinions in terms of where other people are coming from, what their journeys are look like. And that's something that we're talking about here as well. We are all very different from a background perspective, and all of the students here are going to go on similar journeys, but in a very different way. So from that perspective, in my opinion, I think just having an open mind and being adaptable to actually just listening and asking questions, whoever the individuals are. The other part I'll say is I was never hesitant to pick up the phone or send an email. I'm like, hey, I saw your talk. I saw your resume. I saw your title, whatever it may be. I'm very intrigued by one of your projects. And I still do this till date, where I would reach out and I would be like, hey, do you have some time to talk about it? Yeah, you would obviously get some people who are going to be like, I don't have time right now. Guess what? Even if you get 1 out of 10, you made one more connection than if you didn't. So just keeping an open mindset, and if people don't reciprocate on your initial attempt, that's okay. Having patience on that front is critical to me, and you continue to meet.
Perfect. Michelle, did you have any other thoughts on that?
I would argue also just exactly what Ravneet said, and not necessarily, how do I say this without sounding weird? Be really authentic. I mean, so part of my networking and part of maintaining connections for years and years and years, which Ravneet is right, that's the hard part, right? Is to have a genuine interest in a lot of different people and what they do. And sometimes I think we're told to be so focused on the career path, on where you're headed from point A to point B, that we sort of put the blinders on, and we're not using people per se, but we're going, oh, you're not going to be important to me, and you're not going to be, and the networking world gets a little bit utilitarian in that way. And I would just urge and encourage you not to do that, but rather to be open to everybody and authentic in your acceptance of all their experiences and all of the, you may think, oh, I'm never going to work in homeless and housing services. It's a grant writing job I had. And sure enough, I'd made some friends. And the next thing I know, I'm a grant writer for Our Family Services in Tucson, Arizona, writing huge grants for the Department of Housing and Urban Development for, housing projects in Tucson, Arizona. So you just never know when some kind of work is going to come your way that's inspiring and meaningful and important. And it comes just because you had a genuine, open connection to someone, not have the blinders on. Just be open to everybody and everything, and then be genuine in that interest, not calculating, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, I think you hear that all the time, right? Of, oh, I don't like going to networking events because you just feel like the weird salesman trying to sell yourself. But I love that. I love how you said that, because I think we could all use that, and whether you're looking for a job or not, right? Kristen, did you have any other thoughts on networking?
Yeah, so I echo what Michelle and Rav Meat have said. I feel that, there are a couple different ways you end up meeting people, whether it's by chance at some event that you didn't even think you were going to go to, and then you ended up there, and those people that you meet at that event that you almost didn't go to end up being so pivotal in some aspect of your life. So there are those people, and then there are the people that maybe you admire something about them. Maybe it's not related to their research or their job. Maybe it's related to how they taught. You really liked how they taught the class and you feel this connection with them. Or maybe it's a researcher and you really admire the research that they're doing, or a project, or their leadership skills. If you can, I think something that I've learned is, it can be scary to reach out to those people because you feel like they don't want to talk to you, or you feel like, oh, they have better things to do than to answer my email or something. But what I've learned is that people love to talk about things that they're passionate about. And so if you are reaching out to someone and you've identified someone that has these traits or has this skill set that you really like and admire, and you kind of are thinking, maybe this person would be a really good mentor to me, having a genuine conversation with them around that whatever it is, whatever made you want to reach out to them, they are going to love to talk about that, and they're going to want to talk about that. So I guess, for me, when it comes to connections, something that I've done is I've found people that I really admire something, whether it's how they're teaching or, and I am still close to a teacher I had in undergrad because I just really liked the affect and the culture in the classroom. And it always stayed with me. And I'm like, I want to be like that if I'm a teacher, if I end up teaching, or a researcher. I think reach out, be genuine, as Michelle was saying, with why you're reaching out to them. And don't be scared and don't think that they're not going to want to talk to you, because they probably will. A lot of people love to act as a mentor, because we've benefited from mentors. So being able to pay that forward is something that most of us really like to do. And so I would just say, don't be scared to see someone that you admire and reach out, because you never know what's going to happen from that initial conversation.
Perfect. And that ties right back into kind of what Rav Meat was saying, of just get out there, right? And it doesn't have to be 20 different outreach, emails or LinkedIn messages. It can be one or two, and those genuine connections. Perfect. Okay, so let's go to the next person. I'm just going to go down the chat here. Isabel. Hi, Isabel. Welcome. Isabel is a junior majoring in biomedical sciences and minoring in German studies. And one of her questions, which I think is very relevant, and not just to research, but I think in any job, how do you get a research position when you're not feeling qualified for that role? Michelle, you kind of touched on this a little bit in your being a TA. Do you want to maybe start us off here?
I'm not sure I'm the one that knows much about this. Because this always irritates me, right? Like, you have to have experience, but you can't get experience. And then this weird conundrum has always puzzled me. Apply. I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but just keep applying. And then when you get, and then when you get the job and you don't know what you're doing, learn. Apply yourself to figure out what the heck is going on. It's going to be hard. It's going to be scary. It's going to take a bunch of time. Do it anyway, and it will always pay off. And the skills, even if that's not your dream career and you end up switching jobs 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times, totally great. Everything that you do, you're going to take a skill to the next thing. And so I think the other piece of this is to think about, when you apply, how you present yourself. And I don't mean of course, the graphic design of your resume is great, but there, my dog is barking. But also thinking about, so I see Anthony, who's a GWS major, thinking about when you get out there and you're starting to apply for a job, and the people are like, gender and women's studies major, what did you come out of that with? Right? What are you, some kind of crazy feminist? The answer is yes. And also, this has taught me how to read really deeply. It's helped me think critically. I'm a fantastic communicator because the major's about writing effectively and making arguments and supporting it with evidence, and then also creativity, trying to envision something better all the time, which is something that, in our major, in our department, is really, really important. So thinking about, how did what I learned in that classroom or at that last job, what skills and what knowledges can I take and represent to the next job or the next opportunity, to make me look as though, I have that exact experience, but I'm the person with the skill set that you want.
Yep, absolutely. Kristen, did you have any thoughts on that? Seeing that you're in research currently.
Yeah, so Maria, I want to say that I think all of us suffer at some level from imposter syndrome, whether we are open, and we should all just be very transparent about it, right? Because it happens. So I don't think you're alone in feeling like you're not qualified for something, because I think all of us at some level go through these phases of feeling like we're not qualified to be where we are or where we're trying to go. But I feel that, being intentional. So, what are the qualifications for that role? Thinking ahead and really trying to, so maybe I know my mentor for my PhD was always talking about my 5-year plan. And I always thought it was so silly. I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing tomorrow, 5-year plan. But it's so valuable to kind of have that time where you're looking and you're like, what do I want to do? What job do I want to do? And what do I need to do to get there? And it's weird because we never really, sometimes we just going through the motions and we never actually think about those things. But if you just if you kind of have a moment, take some time, think about the position you're wanting, look at the qualifications and think, okay, so it looks like they're wanting a little bit of this. Maybe I can volunteer to get some experience that way, or maybe I can, so I guess I would say just being a little bit more intentional and taking that time to think about, where you're trying to go and what little steps that you can take to get there, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of relates to what Michelle was talking about, like those transferable skills, right? It might not be exact experience, but you have skill sets that maybe could apply. That's perfect. Ravneet, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I would say the biggest part, I completely agree with what Kristen and Michelle said here. One thing that I'll add in to both the comments that have been made before is the fact that when you apply for a job, and if you know everything that they're looking for, then you are overqualified. Let's keep that in mind, right? But so one thing that I'll say is always go in with a confidence in yourself, right? I firmly believe that diversity is the backbone of innovation. These days, everyone's trying to be innovative, right? So if you are lacking on some side of, let's say in this case, research, I'm sure, Isabel, you have other skills that wherever you go, you can make that team better. That is the mindset that I work with, and it has worked for me, where, yes, I might not know this, but guess what? I know these 5 other things, and I can make your team better while I learn what research is, how I can be a better researcher, while training other people on that team with my 5 skills and learning about research from the other team members. And I think that's a team environment that a lot of people look for these days, where people grow from each other instead of just saying, like, I'm just going to keep hiring trainers to train everyone. There is no better training than having people sitting next to you and teaching you of what they have learned over the years. And I think that's a critical part for me on that front. Just believing in yourself. That's okay if I don't know a certain part. Being honest about it. No, I don't have this experience, especially for new graduates. We have a lot of book knowledge. We might not have actual practical knowledge. And that's okay. That goes back to Michelle's thing, right? If I don't get the job, how do I get the experience to actually show I have the experience? So from that perspective, I would say being confident in what you bring to the table and sharing that with them. I would say a lot of people, personally, as somebody who hires quite a bit of people because of turnover every year, one of the things I look for is your mindset. What mindset? Are you eager to learn? Or are you just content with just doing the day-to-day stuff that has been asked of you? I think there are multiple different things people look for. So that's why your attitude, your confidence in yourself, and what you can bring, how you can make the other team better, are all those things that go into hiring a new person, at least from my side.
Perfect. Thank you. And just to kind of recap some of those things that I was pulling out of here was, everyone feels that imposter syndrome or kind of the hesitation sometimes when you take on a new role, and there's always going to be a learning curve, always. So thank you all for sharing that. So I'm looking at the chat here, and there's some consistent questions. Hi, Anthony. Anthony is also studying gender and women's studies and also public and applied humanities with an emphasis in public health. Awesome. And also Desmond, who's an alumnus that's joining us today. They both kind of had questions that are similar about finding opportunities in academia. So, Ravneet, you just kind of mentioned how you're in a hiring role. What does this process look like to get into working in higher ed? Do you want to maybe take that question first?
Yeah, Michelle might turn out to be a better person to give advice on the research, hiring, and that part. But I will say from our perspective, just keeping an eye out on what's available out there. These days, there are multiple job posting forums that you can keep looking at. And I'll go back to the previous question. If you're interested in a certain department, if you're interested in working with a certain researcher, if you're interested in working with a certain administrator whose work you like, there's no harm in reaching out to them and say, these are some of my qualifications. I would love to be part of your current research project. If something comes up, can you please let me know? And to be very honest, depending upon the time that they are in the project, you might actually get an invitation to actually speak to the individual. And that's all you need. And if you get the job, perfect. If you don't get it, guess what? You made a connection. Because tomorrow, if somebody needed to hire a person with your skill, they'll be like, you know what? Oh, I remember Anthony or Desmond actually reached out to us and they have these skills. Let me reach out to them and see if they're still looking for an opportunity. So reaching out and doing that is the best way you can make the connection or even land an opportunity to work in higher ed. But, you know, especially as an R1 institution like University of Arizona, we have so many research opportunities from top to bottom. I think one part that would help is if you knew what area you want to do the research in, right? Because the research that my office does is very different than what Michelle does, which is going to be very different than what Kristen does. But so understanding what kind of research you want to do and then connecting with the right individuals might be the best step to move forward in that direction.
Perfect. And I just saw Michelle Welker. She also had a similar question in here, and she's working in program evaluation and data analytics, or getting her master's, sorry. And again, yeah, looking for those job openings, getting your foot in the door, right? And making those connections. Perfect. Michelle, do you want to add some thoughts?
I'll add, not so much on the research, and I just had a thought as Ravneet was talking, because I think Kristen can really talk about the research part of it. But you know, it's funny. There's so many opportunities to be in higher ed. So I read those questions and you could maybe think, oh, what does it look like to, you know, how do you get to be a professor? How do you be a classroom teacher or whatever that looks like, and a researcher? That's one direction. But man, Lacey and I met through another hat that I wear at the university called CATS Academics, which is athletic advising support. And it's in student, oh gosh, Lacey, I'm not going to remember, student success and retention initiatives.
Well, I think you got it. That's good.
Okay. I never call the that's what I mean. There's so many, I don't even know what the acronyms stand for. But so that, you know, there's this whole branch of the university, and this is true across higher ed. I think increasingly there are these places for student support where you get to work with students. It might be, you know, we've got the think tank at the University of Arizona. You may be tutoring, you might be working in a writing center, you might be working in SALT and alternative learning strategies. You could be supporting athletes and being sort of academic advisors in that way. I just think there's, in addition to how much research and possibilities there's also this instructional student support side of things in higher ed, especially in larger universities, that is, I mean, fairly recent. I think probably within the last 10 or 15 years, these programs have really sprung up and bloomed, and there's all kinds of opportunities. And I know just in CATS, you know, you see a lot of us. So I do it part-time because I don't want it to be my full-time job. And, you know, there's a bunch of us who have part-time positions, and several of us have then moved on to full-time positions in other parts of the university. So don't be afraid to take the part-time job and wait the tables on the side. It's going to be okay. You know, work at Starbucks and then do your 20 hours a week or whatever it is in some small program. And you're going to make connections, and you're going to be a go-getter, and you're going to do a great job, and your reputation will precede itself, and good things will happen. But look for those jobs that you wouldn't necessarily even know exist, I think.
Right. Absolutely. Keeping your ear to the ground, right? Kristen, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that I definitely agree with everything. The only thing I'll add is that, you know, I learned this the hard way as an incoming PhD student. I relied on the website, the internet, to tell me everything that the researchers were doing. And what I learned is that those are really outdated. So this just really speaks to what Ravneet was saying about reaching out, because a lot of times what's on a website, maybe their projects that they're working on now, their recent publications that would kind of let you see what their work, like what research area they're in. Those websites are not always updated regularly. And so just, you know, again, just reach out, and because a lot of times you'll hear that they're working on something that you would have never have seen from their site. So I think that's just another reason to reach out directly over an email. And if that's scary, have someone read your email for you and go through that to make sure that it sounds okay, you're presenting yourself in the right way. And I think that will turn out to be good for you for sure.
Great. Thank you. And, just some consistent themes that, again, to wrap up this question is, making those connections, applying, getting their foot in the door, and being aware of what's happening and becoming part of that industry and getting a feel for the language, the key stakeholders, all of that, as you're looking to hopefully come in and work in higher education and within other areas too, not just in research or data, right? Because they can all feed together. So I'm going back down here. There's a couple of themes. So I wanted to recognize Rita. Rita is a student. She's majoring in applied humanities. And, she talks about, how do you know which degree you wanted to pursue? And we also have Matthew, and he's majoring in applied humanities and talking about how you get a job that you wanted and not one that you're going to settle for. And I think that also relates to Marisol's question, who's a senior majoring in information science and minoring in business ethics, where she's looking at career transitions. So kind of summing up those questions, really, I think we're talking about knowing when to make shifts and when is the time to do that, and what's our strategies in order to make those shifts so that you do have, we talked about passion earlier, we talked about interest earlier, but are there specific things that we can do or share that can make that process better?
I'll say this part. So from a personal experience, right? So while growing up in India, I had 2 goals, right? Very simplistic. When people ask you like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? I know it's a very simple, cheesy question that parents or family members ask like 2-year-old, 5-year-olds or whatever. And I always I still remember, I think I was 10 years old and I saw my first cousin actually come to the US. And since that day, I was like, I want to go to the US and I want to be an engineer. What are you going to do with it? I have no idea. That was me. I don't even know what engineering means. I'm 10 years old, but that was my ticket to go to the US, right? So from that perspective, I set that internal goal, right? I come from a business family, but I decided to do engineering here. And my mom still gives me a hard time about it because my first title after graduating here was business analyst, right? So she still says, you ran from the family business because you wanted to be an engineer. And now guess what? You are doing business analyst and half your job is business intelligence. So the reason I say that is at multiple times in your career, you will feel that maybe there's something else out there. How I keep myself on track or how I gauge how I'm enjoying it is the fact that, am I still happy doing what I'm doing? Am I still enjoying what I'm doing? I don't know if you can see it back right here above. There's a whiteboard behind me that has a scale from 0 to 100. And then I have a box from 25 to 65. I did not draw this for this exercise. I've always had it for 12 years now. Basically, that means that I'm going to work between 25 and 65 years of my age, assuming I don't hit a lottery or something, but let's say I do that. The goal behind the box is a reminder, am I happy in those timeframes, right? If you're not happy, for me, that means I need to explore something else. It's just a reminder from that perspective. And the happiness could be, what makes me happy could be very different than what makes Michelle happy, what makes Lacey happy. And it's very different, right? You might say, I want to make more money. That's perfectly okay. I want to make a bigger impact. I want to figure out if I can work for UN because that's what I feel connected to, right? I want to move to a bigger city because I want a job in New York City because that's what my dream has been, right? You find what makes you happy. So I know it's not a direct answer to your question about like how you know what you pursue in your career, But I think it's very important to find what's your calling, what is going to make you as an individual happy, because once you're happy, you are striving for greatness, in my opinion. If you're not necessarily on par on that front, it becomes harder because you are going to be, I don't have a better word, so I'll use the word grumpy, coming into work every day and be like, you'll still do a good job, but you're not happy. There are two different things for me. So I'll leave it at that point, but I think that's something that I personally use to keep myself motivated.
No, that's an excellent strategy for navigating any sort of transition, whether it's a career or just a job or anything, is taking time to really do that self-reflection. And I love your graph, and maybe you can send us a picture of it afterwards and we can post it.
I mean, I'll send it, but I'm probably gonna get an E on the artist work.
That's okay, Ravneet. We lean into our strengths. Michelle, what are kind of strategies that you would recommend to maybe some of our participants today who have these questions?
Yeah, I really agree with the happy, and for me, it's also about energize, and that's just because I'm an extrovert, right? But part of that is just, am I energized at the end of the day? At the end of the day, do I go, I might be tired. I mean, I might have had a really long day and whatever, but am I just generally like jazzed up about what went on from 9 to 5? And if the answer to that on most days is yes, then I'm probably in the right place. We all have really terrible days where you're like, this is terrible. But if the vast majority of the days are, yeah, that was really good work today, and I'm happy with what I did, and I feel good in myself about what I'm doing every day and giving so much of my life to. I would say in the early 20s, this is going to sound very strange, but I've taught hundreds of students at this point in my career, and many of them in high school. So I watched them go to college, and now they're starting to, they're sort of in their early careers, or they're sort of mid to late 20s. And it's been really fascinating to watch. And those who are being most agile, those who are going to something, not liking it, and then transitioning and going to something else, have not gotten overburdened financially. And I know that sounds really crazy. And that's not to say don't take student loans, because, do what you need to do to get your education. It's everything. But they didn't buy a huge house that then required them to make 6 figures by the time they were 24. They didn't buy a Ferrari when they really could only, afford a Honda. And it just sounds kind of funny, but those people who've been financially responsible and to a certain extent, independent, have been able to quit the job they don't like, maybe wait some tables or do sort of a filler kind of position for a bit of time, and then go into something else that they love, that they are more interested in. It might necessitate a move, and they're able to do that. So that's something to consider. And I certainly worked in my 20s. I worked at times, I had 2 or 3 jobs at times in my 20s before I went back to grad school. And I think if, someone in the chat asked, what would you tell your newly graduated college self? And I would have told her, you think that this is hard right now, but you're going to look back with a lot of love and remember it with a lot of fondness. And so, it might be difficult, and it may not be the picture perfect thing that everybody thinks you're supposed to have, a perfect job with perfect health insurance and, a new house by the time you're 25. But probably the more independent you can remain, the more nimble you can be, and the more opportunities you can seize when they come up, and if your energy is low and you need to make a change.
Perfect. And I love that, you mentioned being able to gauge that energy, but also not falling into the comparison trap and trying to live other people's ideals of success and really defining that for yourself. Perfect. Kristen, would you like to comment?
Yeah, something that I was thinking about was, this feeling of not really knowing what you want to do yet. You have like a lot of interests, and like I think we've all probably been there, where we're like not really sure. We have some ideas. I think for me, something that I've learned is to go into things with a really open mind. I think this overlaps with some of the stuff that Michelle has definitely mentioned about, going into an opportunity, and even though knowing that maybe that's not exactly what you want to do yet, you're going to go away with it with some skill. You're going to meet someone who ends up leading you to the next where you want to be, or something's going to happen. So I think being open and entering, this new experience with an open mind, that you're going to come away with something, and being intentional about that. Even though you feel that, this is maybe not where you want to be. At the same time, I think that some people may not have the flexibility to leave, and they might not be happy in their job, but they might not be able to leave for a number of reasons. And for that, I think something that you could do is maybe try to find happiness somewhere else while you're, so maybe that's volunteering on the side. Maybe that's, spending more time with people who support you. So if you ever feel like you're not happy in a role, in an experience, maybe try to find other ways to supplement that, while also keeping your finger on the pulse of other opportunities that come up in the job area that you may be able to move to.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that concept of intentionality and being present with where you're at, and finding other ways to fill your bucket. Right? It might not be in your job, it could be in other areas. So I appreciate you saying that, Kristen. We're kind of getting closer to time, and we have some more questions, but I really like, is it Payu? Welcome. They are majoring in applied humanities with an emphasis in spatial organization and design thinking, which anyone has been studying design thinking, or Bill Burnett and Dave Evans on how design thinking applies to careers and your work. Fascinating. But she has a great question, and she talks about challenges. So challenges that you've met along your career journey, and maybe how you overcome some of those challenges. So Michelle, do you want to maybe start with that and share some of your experiences?
Oh man, I think I just made like 5 mistakes today. Yeah, all the time. Did you make mistakes? And maybe you mean like, did you choose the wrong job? I don't know about that. I think one of the most important things anytime is, and this is so hard when you're new at something, like, and it doesn't matter what stage of your life or your career is in, you want to look like you know what you're doing, right? And so when you make a mistake, I think sometimes there's this natural tendency to just be like, oh no, I didn't do that or whatever, because you don't want to look dumb. But I think it's a really, really powerful approach to own the mistake and do your very best to make up for it. And then of course, obviously learn from it and move on. I think for me, my challenges have always been having a boss. I don't like having supervisors. I just don't. I'm a very independent worker. I don't like micromanagers. And in general, I have worked really hard to be in situations where I work for people who are real hands-off and real cool. And when I got, in the throes or in the crosshairs of a micromanager, I really did. I would just be like, I got to go somewhere else because this isn't going to work out for anybody. So that's probably been my biggest challenge. I love to work with people. I was a basketball player, so I like teams. I don't like hierarchical authority. It just doesn't work for me. It never has. So anyway, the classroom's cool, right? Because I can just work with students and sort of do what I want to do in there. So I think that's the key, is to kind of know yourself. And then if you make mistakes, own them.
Yep, I love that. Never play the blame game, right? Always take that upon yourself and control what you can control to move forward. Kristen, any thoughts on challenges that you faced in your career journey?
Yeah, I just really liked what Michelle said about owning your mistakes, because that is such a leadership trait. And it's so funny because you think if you just like distance yourself from it or blame someone else, it benefits you in that moment. But the reality is the perception of people who own their mistakes is so much better, because it just shows a maturity that's there and a leadership trait. So I just really want to echo what Michelle was saying. I think leaning into when you're face to face with a challenge, I think really leaning into your social support, whether that's family, friends, mentors, I think leaning into them for advice. And I think that's something that's really served me. Not just professional, just even like my mom, I call her every day. I'm like, Mom, what do I do? But I just having someone to be vulnerable and talk about a challenge and talk about how you're going to address it and not feel like and where there's trust. I think that's a huge support in that moment when you're facing a challenge. I think another really quick thing that I'll mention is, I think I mentioned this before, but I really feel strongly about looking at mistakes as not as regrets, but as lessons. So you learn from everything, right? Sometimes you learn more from mistakes than you do from anything else. So just going in with that mindset where, yes, this could have been done better. Yes, I could have done research in my undergrad, but now what I'm going to do is tell every undergrad that I know that that is an option for them, because, that's just, you can take some things that you wish maybe would have gone different, but you can move forward with them in different ways.
Looking for those learning opportunities and knowing that we don't always have the answers, right? And leaning on those in our circle who we trust, and they can help us through that. Ravneet, any final thoughts on this question and challenges that you faced?
I would say I'll start with this part. Making mistakes is a huge part of human nature. If you don't make mistakes, there are two things that are happening. Either you're sweeping under the rug and hoping that nobody finds out, or you are just perfect. And if you are, please reach out to me, because I would want to learn how you're doing that. We all make mistakes. I would say that part. I've made plenty, especially, I think Michelle mentioned, like when you're new to something, you are so scared because it's a new job, you don't want to mess up. But guess what? You put so much pressure on yourself that you do end up messing up. When you do that, raise your hand and say, you know what? I didn't know what I was doing. I messed up. I'm sorry. But like Kristen said, make it a learning experience for you. Don't make it a habit. Because I think that's where it's going to look bad upon you. If you make a mistake once, people would be easy on you. You make it twice, they're getting a little anxious about you. Once you start making mistakes repeatedly, I think that's what happens. So if you raise your hand, you learn from it, I think a lot of people will work with you a lot comfortably and will have confidence in you. There's one thing to have confidence in you, but building somebody else's confidence in you is a very hard skill to have, because you are trying to change their opinion about yourself, and it's very hard. And I think the other part that I'll say is, from a leadership perspective, when you are part of your teams, right? Sometimes you make mistakes individually, but sometimes you make mistakes as a team. Never play the blame game. Never be like, oh, Kristen was the one who actually did this. Michelle was the one who did this. If you are the one who didn't actually make the mistake, because you know who made the mistake, but still raise the hand and say, you know what, we as a team messed up. We as a team are going to learn and move forward and do our best to make sure we don't repeat it. And I think that's something that will build, again, confidence and trust of your team members in you. It will show empathy from your perspective towards all of the team members that you have. And it is something that I feel gets recognized a lot more often than just single-handedly, you delivering something or you making a mistake as well. So I would say, again, just remember, we all make mistakes. And if you don't, reach out to me.
Yes, reach out to all of us. Share your advice. Perfect. Well, this is great. I know we have just a couple more minutes, so thank you so much for our participants and these questions. They were really fantastic and led to a great discussion. Panelists, I'm going to give you a challenge. So, when you tweet, or even when you have to put in a message to someone on LinkedIn, you get a limited amount of characters. So in 100 words or less, what advice would you give to recent alumni, students, as they look to navigate careers in research and academia?
My advice is going to sound very cliche, is don't take no as a no, just take no as a not yet. So whatever you're trying to do and wherever you're trying to go, you're probably going to get rejected. You're not going to get hired at a certain time or something. Just it's not a no. You're not ever going to be a classroom teacher or a really cool researcher. It's just a not yet and not maybe a right at that space, and just keep going.
I think something I continuously tell myself is that sometimes it's not about your content expertise. It's about, who can move something forward, or who's passionate, or who is. So I feel like, going with the imposter syndrome, we go in, thinking we're not qualified for something or something like that. And sometimes it's not about who knows the most about that topic. It's about who can move it forward and be a leader. And so I would just say, yeah, that's way over 100 words, but it's something that I always tell myself. And so I just felt like I needed to say that.
Perfect. That's a great reminder. Rav Meat, round us out here.
So for me, I would emphasize on the word why. So how I think about that is, why do you want to do something? When you're applying for a job, right? Ask yourself that question. Why do you want to do this? And there's no right or wrong answers. It could be just because I want to make ends meet. I need to put food on the table, or I want to buy that Ferrari or $1 million mansion, whatever you want to do. Ask that question to yourself. Or it could be as simple as, you know what? I feel connected to the higher ed mission, and that's good enough. That's number one. And then once you get that opportunity to work with a team, work with work in higher ed or wherever else you go, whoever you work with, ask them the question, why are you doing this? So you can learn with them, and you can understand that, together as a team, we can go a lot further if we are all aligned in terms of what the intention behind our work is. And I think a lot of times people don't necessarily tend to align their missions together. And that's where you have some sense of maybe a disconnect. So again, just ask why to yourself and to others you work with.